Welcome to Halfway Dark, where night shift workers share their darkest encounters. Before we dive in, only 2% of you watching are subscribed, but subscribers get first access to the scariest stories. Join our community of brave souls and hit that subscribe button. A night shift worker's view, and it's terrifying. He's just standing there, on the other side of the camera, staring. It's 3 in the morning. The hallway is supposed to be totally empty, and he's just there. But it's not a recording. It can't be, because he's looking right at the lens. This is the story of Arthur Moretti and his last watch, the echo chamber. So, the story kicks off with Arthur. He's a guy in his late 40s, living his life in reverse. While the rest of the world is asleep, he's patrolling the sterile, echoing halls of the Apex Innovations Park, a campus of glass and steel that feels more like a tomb than a workplace after hours. His only real companions are the low hum of the servers and 16 monitors flickering with silent black and white shots of empty hallways, vacant lobbies, and deserted parking lots. Arthur is a ghost in his own life. A night shift has worn away his connections to the daytime world. It's a deep loneliness that anyone who's ever worked those hours can understand. This isn't just a job. It's a kind of exile. The thing that kicks it all off isn't some big, dramatic event. It's quiet. It's a single loose file he finds while cleaning out a desk drawer in the security office. It's a year-old cold case. An employee at Apex, a woman named Lena Rivas, vanished from the property. 1 minute she was walking to her car after working late. The next, she was just gone, traceless. The file is pathetic. No witnesses, no forced entry, no real evidence at all. Just one grainy screenshot from a security camera showing her walking down hallway C, and then nothing. The case went cold. Everyone moved on. But for Arthur, sitting in the same chair, watching the same bank of monitors a year later, Lena's disappearance feels raw and present. It's this question mark hanging in the dead air of the building. And for Arthur, an obsession grows, a desperate need for an answer nobody else is even looking for anymore, walking in a ghost's footsteps. And this is where the dread really starts to creep in. Arthur's obsession completely takes over his routine. He starts by pulling all the archived footage from that night, a year ago. He watches hours of it, tracing Lena's last known movements. He sees her at her desk, packing her bag. He watches her have a quick, forgettable chat with a man in a maintenance uniform by the elevators. He sees her start her walk down hallway C. Pretty soon, just watching isn't enough. He feels like he needs to walk it. He starts timing his patrols to match Lena's last path. At 10:47 p.m., he leaves the security office. He walks the exact same route, his footsteps echoing where hers must have. He stands in the empty parking spot where her car used to be, just staring out into the dark. He's not a security guard anymore. He's like an archaeologist of a recent tragedy, digging through layers of silence. And that's when the building starts to watch him back. It's little things at first. A flicker of movement on a camera that's gone when he rewinds the tape. The unmistakable sound of a door clicking shut down a long corridor where he knows, for a fact, he is the only person. He finds a coffee mug on a desk in a totally empty office, and it's still warm. For a while, he tells himself it's just tricks of a tired mind, products of exhaustion and isolation. His focus narrows in on that one piece of footage, the maintenance man. The chat with Lena was short, less than 30 seconds. A nod, a few words, a gesture down the hall. The man's face is turned away from the camera, his features totally lost in the grainy image. He's just a shape, a ghost in the machine. Arthur plays the clip over and over, dozens of times, trying to pull one solid detail out of the digital snow. The uniform is generic. His posture unremarkable. He is completely, terrifyingly normal a monster, hiding in plain sight. Night after night, Arthur sits in that booth, the live feeds on 15 screens, and the old footage of the maintenance man playing on a loop on the 16th. The past and the present flickering side by side. The line between them starts to get very, very blurry. The live feed, this is where the whole story snaps. It's deep in his shift, maybe 3 a.m., the witching hour. Arthur is running purely on caffeine and obsession, his eyes burning from staring at the screens. He's watching the loop, the maintenance man, the quick chat with Lena, the turn away. Only this time something's different. On the 16th screen, in the archival footage, the man at the end of the hallway, the man from a year ago, turns his head. He turns it slowly, deliberately. Not towards where Lena went, but towards the camera. Towards Arthur. His face is still a blur in the low-res image, but there's no mistaking it. He is looking right at the lens. Arthur's heart just stops. He blinks, shakes his head. It has to be a hallucination. Sleep deprivation playing one last, cruel trick. He glances over at the main monitor, the one showing a live feed of that same hallway. Hallway C, it's empty, silent, just a sterile, white corridor under cold fluorescent lights. He lets out a shaky breath, almost a laugh at how frayed his nerves are. He looks back at the 16th monitor, the archive. The man is still there, looking at him, and then he raises a hand. A slow, calm wave. Ice shoots through Arthur's veins. This isn't a memory. This isn't a ghost. This is real. His mind is scrambling, trying to understand how this is possible. His eyes dart down to the data overlay on the screen. The file name reads archive_7_11_last_YEAR. But underneath it, in tiny text he's never bothered to read before, is the network stream info. It's not playing from a hard drive. It's an active IP address. It's a live feed. Someone has been feeding a hidden camera to his monitor, disguised as an old file. The man isn't a ghost from last year. He's in the building. He's in the building right now. The falling action, the inevitable approach, and then just pure panic. Arthur's mind, foggy with exhaustion a second ago, is now painfully sharp. He lunges for the phone to call the police, but his hands are trembling so badly he can barely hold it. As his fingers mash at the keypad, all 15 monitors flicker once and then die. The lights in the security booth cut out. The server hum stops. He's thrown into total darkness, except for the green emergency light over the door and the faint, ghostly glow of a single screen. The 16th screen. The live feed is still on, powered by something else. And on that screen, the man isn't standing still anymore. He's walking. He's walking down hallway C, his pace casual, methodical. There's no menace in his stride, which is what makes it so awful. It's the calm, steady confidence of a predator that knows the cage is locked. He isn't running. He doesn't have to. Arthur is paralyzed in his chair, a prisoner in his own security station. He's completely powerless. He can't call for help. All the building's electronic locks are dead. All he can do is sit and watch on this one malevolent screen as the man gets closer. He watches him turn a corner, vanishing from that camera's view. And Arthur knows with a sickening certainty, he's now in the main hallway, the one that leads directly to the security office. He can hear it now. It's not just on the screen anymore. The soft, rhythmic squeak of rubber soles on the linoleum floor. Closer, slower. The footsteps stop, right outside his door. The golden egg, there's a heavy silence. A silence that feels more complete than any of the empty nights that came before. Arthur holds his breath, listening to the frantic pounding in his own chest. Then, a new sound. A small metallic click. The sound of a key expertly sliding into the lock on his door. And that's where the story ends. The real terror was never about seeing the final act. It was about the horrifying, unstoppable journey toward a conclusion you can't escape. Arthur's obsession, his digging into the past, didn't lead him to an answer. It led the answer right to his door. The horror is in that total loss of control and becoming a ghost in your own story, traceless. So, what do you think happens when that door opens? What would you have done if you were Arthur? I'd honestly love to hear your theories and ideas down in the comments. This story is a chilling one, and I'm curious to see where your imaginations go with it. If you enjoyed this deep dive into psychological horror, maybe consider liking and subscribing. It lets me know you want to see more stories like this. Thanks for watching, and maybe keep a light on tonight. My workplace has a strange occurrence every night at 3 a.m. I want you to listen to this. It's the audio from a security feed just before everything went wrong. You can hear the quiet electric hum of the facility. It's 2 hours 59 minutes and 57 seconds a.m. A second later, still quiet. Then at 2 hours 59 minutes and 59 seconds in the morning, there's a sharp click. For 1 second, exactly at 3 hours 0 minutes and 0 seconds a.m., the power hum just dies. Total unnerving silence. When it comes back, the sound is off, deeper. And down this long white hall, a single storage unit, door unit 734 starts, groaning open. It doesn't reveal a room. It reveals a slab of pure, solid darkness that just swallows the light. And from that blackness, a deep, distorted hum starts to pulse. I've been the night guard at this place for 6 months. It's a brand new, state-of-the-art facility. But every single night, at 3 in the morning on the dot that happens, I told myself it was a glitch, a bug in the system. Tonight, I'm going to see what's inside. My job title is a joke, Overnight Asset Protection Specialist. It's a fancy way of saying I watch a high-tech box full of smaller boxes. The company is called OmniStow, one of those new, fully automated storage places. It's climate-controlled, pressure-sealed, and has more cameras than a Vegas casino. It's also plopped down in the middle of nowhere, a sterile white cube in a sea of empty fields. By day, it's pretty impressive. Rich people store wine, art, God knows what else in these perfect little sterile units. But at night, it's just me. Me, the hum of the servers, and these endless identical hallways. The silence in here is so thick you can feel it pressing on you. The job itself is stupidly easy. I sit in the control room, stare at a wall of monitors, and walk the halls a couple of times a shift. For the first month, it was great. Quiet, easy money. Then I noticed the system logs, or what wasn't in them. Every morning around 3:05, I'd run a diagnostic, and every single time, it showed a power fluctuation at exactly 3 a.m. A tiny flicker. Not enough to trip the backup generators, but the lights in my control room would dip for a second. The strange part? The system never called it an error. It wasn't a fault. It was just logged as an event, like it was scheduled to happen. I asked my boss about it, and he just shrugged. Said the system was new, probably had quirks. Told me not to worry unless something caught fire. About a week later, I saw it for myself. I was on my second patrol, walking down Corridor C. It's the longest one in the place, just a dead straight line of white walls and gray doors. As I was walking, the lights flickered. I checked my watch. 3 o'clock in the morning. I didn't think anything of it until I heard this low metallic groaning. Way down the hall, a door was sliding open. Unit 734. I just froze. That's not possible. These doors are mag sealed. You need a client's thumbprint and a key code at the control panel to open one. There's no handle, no manual override out here. I grabbed my radio. Control, this is Miller. I've got a self-opening unit in Corridor C, Unit 734. The radio just crackled with the automated response. No unscheduled access events. Logged, Officer Miller. All units are secure. I looked from the radio in my hand to the wide open door. Impossible. The system, the all-seeing brain of this whole damn place, was telling me the door was closed. But I was looking right at it. A black, gaping hole in a wall of perfect sealed gray doors. It felt like a wound. A pit of darkness that seemed to just drink the sterile light from the hallway. My training screamed at me to go, to investigate. But every other part of me, every primal instinct, was screaming to turn and run. All the ghost stories other guards tell suddenly didn't seem so stupid. This felt wrong. I stood there for what felt like an hour, my heart hammering against my ribs. Then, at exactly 3:01, the door slid shut. A soft, final thud. The hallway was perfect again. I ran to the unit, checking the seal. It was flawless, no marks, no scratches. I sprinted back to the control room, my boots echoing in that awful silence. I pulled up the security footage, and there I am, standing in the hall. At 2:59, it's all normal. At 3 o'clock, the footage just dissolves into a mess of static for exactly 60 seconds. Then, at 3:01, the picture is back. I'm still standing there, looking like I've seen a ghost. And the door to Unit 734 is closed. According to the recording, it was never open at all. This became my new nightly routine. A little horror show just for me. Every night, I'd watch the monitor for Corridor C every night at 3 o'clock. The power would dip. The camera feed would turn to garbage for 60 seconds. And when it came back, it was like nothing had happened. But I knew. I knew for 1 minute. That thing was open. The isolation started eating at me. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was heavy, like it was waiting for something. Was I losing my mind? Was this what months of night shifts in solitude did to you? The paranoia started creeping in. I'd hear things, a soft whisper that sounded like it was right over my shoulder, but I was always alone. The hum from the server room would seem to twist, almost phoning a word, but never quite getting there. I got obsessed with Unit 734. I spent my days digging through the records. Nothing. The unit was officially empty, unassigned. It didn't exist on the main server, only buried deep in the system architecture. A ghost in the machine. After 2 months of this, of knowing, but having no proof, I just couldn't take it anymore. I was past being scared. I just needed to know. I had to see it up close again. I had to know what was in that darkness. I was more curious than I was afraid. So I decided tonight was the night. I wasn't going to be in the control room. I was going to be standing right in front of Unit 734 when the clock hit 3. It was a massive breach of protocol, but I was at my breaking point. I left the control room at 2:50. Walking down Corridor C felt different. The air felt colder, heavier. The bright white lights seemed to make the shadows deeper. Every footstep was unnaturally loud, like the building itself was holding its breath. I stopped about 20 feet from Unit 734, and I waited. The silence was crushing. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. I just watched the clock on my wrist. 2:58. My hands were slick with sweat. 2:59 I sucked in a breath, and the air tasted like static. 3 o'clock, the lights flickered. But being this close, I felt it. It wasn't a power dip. It was a physical jolt, a deep vibration that came up from the floor and into my bones. And then, right on cue, Unit 734 started to groan open. The sound was agonizing, a slow, scraping shriek of metal that grated on my nerves. And the darkness inside? It wasn't just black. It had a texture to it, a presence. It was a deep, oily black that seemed to ripple and bulge, like some kind of living cloth. And the hum from the recording was real, a low bass drum that made my teeth ache. It was the sound of something vibrating at the wrong frequency for our world. I took a step forward. My flashlight beam, usually so strong, was just eaten by the darkness, a foot from the door. It didn't light anything up. It just vanished. My heart hammering, I reached my hand toward the opening. The air turned instantly, painfully cold. It felt like plunging my arm into a bucket of ice. I snatched it back, my fingers already numb. What the hell was in there? It wasn't a storage unit. It wasn't empty. It was something else entirely. I don't know where the courage came from, but I took that last step. I crossed the threshold into Unit 734, and the world broke. It wasn't a room. It wasn't even a place. It was just an endless, humming, rippling darkness. There was no up or down, no floor, no walls. I was hit with this sickening vertigo, a feeling of falling in every direction at once. Time just shattered. I saw bits of my life flashing by, not in order, just a chaotic jumble. My 5th birthday, my first day at this job, me as an old man, lying in some hospital bed I'd never seen before. Then I saw other things, flashes of other places. A city of glass towers under a purple sun. A dead forest where gray ash fell like snow. I saw this hallway, but ancient and crumbling, choked with vines. And in that other hallway, I saw another guard, pale and terrified, staring at an open door. He looked exactly like me. This thing, this place, it was a wound. A nexus point where every place and every time was bleeding together. Every ghost story, every unexplained noise, every workplace terror was just an echo from a place like this. There wasn't a monster in there. The room was the monster. The horror was seeing reality. Everything I thought was solid and real just completely dissolved. Panic finally hit me. Pure animal terror. I scrambled backwards, flailing at nothing, my legs churning in a void. I couldn't tell which way was out. The humming grew louder, vibrating inside my skull, trying to shake my thoughts apart. Then I saw it, the rectangle of white hallway light. It looked 1,000,000 miles away. I lunged for it. A scream stuck in my throat. I crashed out onto the cold, solid floor of Corridor C. I landed hard, gasping for air that felt like it was burning my lungs. I scrambled away and looked back. The door to Unit 734 was sliding shut with that soft, final thud. The hum was gone. The corridor was silent and perfect again. I looked at my watch. It read 3:01 I was out. I was safe. But I wasn't. Something was wrong. I looked down the long hall. It seemed longer now. The perspective was skewed. The vanishing point just a little too far away. The silence that came back wasn't empty anymore. It felt watchful. I was only inside that place for 60 seconds, but a piece of me is still in there. And a piece of it came out with me. I can still feel it. A cold spot in the back of my mind. A lingering stain of that broken, disgusting reality. I turned and ran. Didn't get my coat. Didn't clock out. I just ran out of that building and into the gray morning, and I never, ever went back. I don't know what would have happened if I'd stayed in there a second longer. I don't want to. Sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, I swear I can still hear that low hum. And I check my watch, just praying it doesn't say 2:59, because I know that somewhere a door is opening onto a gateway of pure madness. I saw what was inside, and now I can't unsee it. If you love stories that creep under your skin, make sure you subscribe and hit that bell for more. And seriously, if you've ever had something unexplainable happen on a late shift, drop it in the comments. I really need to know I'm not the only one. Title: The Walmart Employee Who Found Something Terrifying in Aisle 13. What you're about to hear is a story born from the legends of the Galveston Walmart, a place haunted by a terrible past. For the overnight employees, the ones who walk the silent aisles when the world is asleep, those legends can feel frighteningly real. This is especially true in the toy aisle, where some workers swear the toys move on their own. Most of us have had a retail job, spending hours under harsh fluorescent lights, stocking shelves and dealing with customers. It's usually boring, sometimes tiring, and occasionally weird. But for many employees at the Walmart on Seawall Boulevard in Galveston, Texas, the job is more than just weird, it's terrifying. Local lore says this store was built near the former grounds of the St. Mary's Orphan Home, the site of one of the deadliest natural disasters in American history. This story is a dramatization of their collective experiences, of what happens when you stop believing in coincidence and start believing in ghosts. Let's call our main character Alex. Alex needed a job. College is expensive, and the overnight stalker gig at the local Walmart paid pretty well. The 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift was tough, but it meant he could still make his morning classes. The job was straightforward. Unload pallets, stock the shelves, don't fall asleep. On his first night, his trainer, Maria, showed him the ropes. She pointed down the store's main drag, called Action Alley. "You'll do grocery, paper, seasonal," she said, before her gaze drifted to a far corner of the store. "Just try to avoid aisle 13 if you can. The managers don't like people wasting time over there." Alex didn't think twice about it, but over the next few weeks, he started hearing the stories. Whispers in the break room, hushed conversations by the time clock. They were always about aisle 13, the toy aisle. One coworker swore he'd heard kids laughing when the store was empty. Another talked about a big red ball that would just roll out of its cage like someone had thrown it. There were even tales of a little girl's voice crying for her mother. Alex, who didn't believe in ghost stories, would just laugh. "It's an old building on the coast," he'd say. "Buildings settle. The wind makes weird noises. You're all just tired and seeing things." He had a rational explanation for everything. Running feet? A rat in the ceiling? An item falling off a shelf? Probably just a bad stocking job by the day crew. He knew the history, of course. Everyone in Galveston did. He knew that during the Great Hurricane of 1900, St. Mary's Orphanage was destroyed, killing 10 nuns and about 90 children. It was a horrible tragedy, a dark chapter in the island's past. But to him, that's all it was, history. Then came the night he couldn't avoid aisle 13. It was late October, and the aisle was already packed with Christmas toys. The regular toy stocker called in sick, and Dave, the no-nonsense manager, gave Alex the assignment. "I need aisle 13 faced and stocked by 4 a May. No excuses," he said. Alex just nodded. It was just another aisle. The first hour was completely normal. The beep of the scanner, the crinkle of plastic, the hum of the freezers. It was all part of the Job's familiar soundtrack. He worked his way down the aisle, lining up dolls and action figures, making sure every box was perfectly straight. Around 2 a.m., the first weird thing happened. A big red playground ball, which was secured in a wire cage with a bunch of others, suddenly dropped to the floor. It didn't roll, it just fell with a dull thud. Alex stared at it. That was ... odd. He picked it up, shoved it back in the cage, and double-checked the latch. It must have been barely hanging on. He went back to work. Minutes later, he heard a faint giggle. He froze, hand hovering over a box of Legos. He looked up and down the aisle. Nothing. "Just tired," he muttered. But then he felt it a pocket of intense cold, like someone had opened a freezer right beside him. He saw his own breath hang in the air for a second, before the feeling vanished. A real chill, not from the AC, crawled up his spine. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. He kept glancing over his shoulder, expecting to see his manager, but he was completely alone. Then things escalated. He was at the far end of the aisle when a stack of board games suddenly slid off the shelf and crashed onto the floor. Alex jumped back, his heart pounding. Nobody was there. The floor hadn't vibrated. They just fell. As he bent down to pick them up, a small toy piano on the shelf behind him started playing a tinny, broken version of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. It played for maybe 10 seconds, then stopped cold. Alex stood up slowly. His skepticism was starting to crack, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. If this story is starting to give you the creeps, do me a quick favor and hit that subscribe button. You're not going to want to miss what happened when Alex decided to confront whatever or whoever was in that aisle with him. Every nerve in Alex's body was screaming at him to get out of there, find his manager, and go home. But some stubborn, logical part of him refused to let him. He was going to finish the job. He tried to explain it all away. A pressure change, faulty wiring in the toy. There had to be an answer. He turned his back on the toys and started breaking down empty cardboard boxes, his movements fast and jerky. That's when he heard it, the sound that would stick with him for years. Bounce, bounce, bounce. It was the sound of a rubber ball on linoleum, coming from the other end of the aisle. He peered down the long corridor of toys, his eyes straining. Nothing. There was no ball. But the sound kept going, slow and deliberate. Bounce, bounce, bounce. And it was getting closer. Sheer panic took over. This wasn't the building. This wasn't the wind. He grabbed his scanner, ready to bolt. And as he turned, it felt like the whole aisle exploded. Dozens of electronic toys switched on at once. A toy fire truck wailed. A talking doll with dead plastic eyes started laughing, a horrible, maniacal sound. Toy cell phones rang with shrill, electronic chirps. It was a wave of terrifying, manufactured joy in the dead of night. He was frozen, trapped in the noise and flashing lights. Then he heard something else underneath it all. A human sound. Faint, disembodied crying. Not just one child, but several. A chorus of pure sorrow that seemed to come from the walls themselves. And then, right next to him, a toy phone on the shelf crackled. A single clear whisper cut through the chaos. It was the voice of a little girl. "Mama?" she asked, her voice full of fear and confusion. Alex's blood ran cold. The history he'd brushed off slammed into him. The hurricane, the orphanage, the stories told of how the nuns, in a desperate act, tied the children to their waists with clothesline to keep them from being swept away, a gesture that proved futile against the storm. Their bodies were found together, a testament to the tragedy. He wasn't just in a haunted Walmart. He was on ground soaked in unimaginable grief. The laughing, the crying, the little girl calling for a mother who could never answer, was all real. The legends were true. Alex didn't scream. He couldn't. The sound was stuck in his throat. He dropped his scanner and he ran. He sprinted down aisle 13, past the laughing dolls and flashing lights, not daring to look back. He flew down the action alley, past pallets of soda and cereal, and didn't stop until he burst through the doors of the break room. He collapsed into a chair, shaking and gasping for air. A few minutes later, Dave, his manager, walked in with a cup of coffee. He took one look at Alex's pale, terrified face and just sighed. He didn't look surprised. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just took a slow sip of coffee and said, "You worked aisle 13 tonight, didn't you?" That calm, knowing question was somehow more terrifying than anything else. It was proof. He wasn't crazy. It wasn't in his head. This was something they all knew about. Over the years, countless employees, from stalkers to managers, have reported these same strange events. Alex put in his 2 weeks' notice the next morning. He finished his time working strictly in grocery and never went near aisle 13 again. The Galveston Walmart still stands on Seawall Boulevard, a place where thousands of people shop every week, most of them completely unaware of the tragic history just beneath their feet. But for the overnight employees who walk those silent halls, the store is a constant reminder that some places hold on to the past. The echoes are still there, and sometimes they demand to be heard. The story of the haunted Walmart taps into a fear we can all understand, the idea that the supernatural can break into the most ordinary parts of our lives. What do you think? Have you ever had a scary experience in a normal place? Share your own spooky retail stories in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this one, please hit that like button and subscribe for more dives into the strange and unexplained. Title: Reddit's Creepiest Night Shift Horror Stories. Have you ever worked the graveyard shift? When the silence gets so deep, you can actually hear your own heartbeat. The rest of the world goes to sleep, and you're left alone with just the shadows and the quiet. But for some people, that quiet gets shattered by something terrifying. These stories, pulled straight from Reddit, are from night shifters who thought they were all alone, but they were dead wrong. From phantom figures in empty hospital wings to bone-chilling encounters at 24-hour gas stations, these tales will make you think twice about working the night shift. You're about to hear 3 real stories from people who found out that when the sun goes down, something much, much darker is waiting to come out. The room at the end of the hall. Our first story takes us inside a hospital late at night. If you've ever been in one after hours, you know it has a special kind of quiet. It's not peaceful. It's a heavy, sterile silence, broken only by the faint beep of a machine or the squeak of shoes on linoleum. Our narrator, we'll call him Mark, was a hospital transporter who is used to this world. He spent his nights moving people and equipment through long, dimly lit hallways. One night, a patient passed away in a room at the very end of the 4th floor wing. It's a sad, but normal, part of the job. The room was cleaned, sanitized, and marked as empty. For a few hours, it was just another vacant room. Later that shift, around 2 a.m., Mark was heading down that same hallway. As he passed the room, he glanced inside out of habit, and his heart just about stopped. Sitting in the visitor's chair, hunched over like she was asleep, was a little old lady. Mark frowned. It was strange for a new patient to be put in a room so quickly, especially without any notice in the middle of the night. He figured it had to be a family member who'd fallen asleep and been forgotten by security. He walked up to the nurse's station to check the floor's patient list. The room was still listed as empty, no new patient. Confused, he grabbed a nurse and they walked back to the room together. Mark explained that an old woman was sitting in the chair, but when they both peered inside, the room was completely empty. The chair was vacant, the bed was perfectly made, and the air was still. The woman had vanished. Mark knew there was no way she could have gotten past him in the narrow hall. There was no other exit. A deep chill crawled up his spine. The nurse, looking a little pale herself, asked him what the woman looked like. Mark gave a simple description: small and frail, with her gray hair in a bun, wearing a pale blue hospital gown. The nurse's face went completely white. She told him his description perfectly matched the patient who had died in that exact room just a few hours earlier. Mark says he never volunteered for jobs on the 4th floor again, especially at night. He just couldn't shake the feeling that some patients never really check out. If that story sent a shiver down your spine, you'll want to stick around. We have 2 more stories tonight that prove the most terrifying things happen while the rest of the world is fast asleep. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on more tales from the darkest corners of Reddit. Section 2. The Voice on the Line. This next story comes from a former 911 operator. She said her job on the night shift was a bizarre mix of total boredom and heart-stopping terror. Most of the night would be dead quiet, but then a single call would come through that made her blood run cold. This was one of those calls. It started on a Tuesday. A call came in on the 911 line. She answered, but there was no one there. Just a wall of static and white noise. She ran through her script, and after a few seconds, the line disconnected. It was weird, but not unheard of. Pocket dials, faulty lines, it happens. But then it happened again the next night, and the night after that. Every single night, at almost the exact same time, a call would come in from the same number. Each time, it was just a blast of deafening white noise, and sometimes what sounded like horrible screaming mixed in with the static. It was terrifying. Every time it happened, they sent officers to the address connected to the landline, and every time the report came back the same. The house was vacant, locked up tight, no signs of entry, and nobody inside. Her bosses told her it was just a technical glitch, a bad phone line getting wet in the rain, but that never explained the screaming. This went on for weeks. The nightly call became a source of dread in the dispatch center. The operator had the number memorized. One night, the call came in right on schedule. She answered, bracing for the static, but this time was different. Beneath the noise, she could hear something else. A faint, pained whisper, like someone trying to force out words but couldn't. Fed up and genuinely scared, she broke protocol. She leaned into her headset and yelled, "Who is this? What do you want?" For a second, there was total silence on the line. The static, the whispering, everything just stopped. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. And then a voice came through. It wasn't pain or screaming. It was a man's voice, perfectly clear, calm, and chillingly close. It said, "I know you're alone." Then the line went dead. The call stopped after that night. The police searched the house one last time and found nothing. No one ever found out who the caller was, or if there even was one. But the operator never forgot those words. Sometimes, the real horror isn't something you see, but a voice on an empty line, reminding you that someone or something knows exactly where you are. Section 3. The Customer in the Dark. Our final story happens in one of the loneliest places you can be. A remote, 24-hour gas station in the middle of nowhere. The storyteller was a college kid, just trying to make extra cash on the graveyard shift. His job was simple: stay awake and handle the few truckers and late-night drivers that passed through between midnight and 6 a.m. Most nights were just him, the hum of the drink coolers, and the headlights of passing cars. But one night was different. Around 3 a.m., a beat-up sedan pulled into the lot. It didn't pull up to a pump, but instead parked in a dark corner, far from the store's bright lights. The engine cut out. The headlights went off. And then, nothing. The car just sat there. The narrator watched it on the security camera, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach as minutes stretched into what felt like forever. Finally, the driver's side door creaked open, and a man got out. He was tall and thin, and he moved with this strange, slow purpose as he walked towards the store. He came inside, and at first, he seemed normal enough. He grabbed a coffee and came up to the counter. But as our narrator was ringing him up, the man started talking. He talked about how quiet it was, how incredibly dark it gets out there, how you could probably hear a scream from a mile away. His tone was casual, but his eyes were laser-focused. The narrator just gave a nervous laugh, trying to play it cool. Then, the man glanced back at his car. The narrator's eyes followed his, and that's when he saw it for the first time. A figure sitting in the passenger seat. They were sitting perfectly still, their face hidden by shadows, not moving a muscle. The driver leaned in, his voice dropping to a low whisper. "My friend out there," he said, nodding towards the car. "They don't like a lot of noise. They really, really enjoy the silence." He paused and looked right into the narrator's eyes. "So it's probably for the best if you stay quiet for a little while. We wouldn't want to disturb them." He put the exact change on the counter, gave a tight, thin smile, and walked out. He got back in his car, and for another 10 minutes, it just sat there in the dark. The narrator was frozen, his hand hovering over the panic button, his mind racing with what could be happening. He stared at that unmoving passenger. Finally, the car's headlights flashed on, and it slowly pulled out of the lot and vanished down the empty highway. He said the rest of his shift was the longest night of his life. He locked the doors and hid in the back room, watching the security monitors until the sun came up. He never saw the car or the man again, and he never found out who or what was sitting in that passenger seat. He quit the next day. Some silences aren't peaceful. They're a warning. Conclusion: the night shift is its own world, isn't it? A world where the normal rules of the day don't seem to apply, and the line between what's real and what's a nightmare, it's terrifyingly thin. For the people in these stories, the quiet of their job was shattered by something they'll never be able to explain. So the next time you're working late, or just find yourself alone in the dark, remember these stories and ask yourself, are you really alone? Thanks for watching. If you've got your own creepy night shift story, I want to hear it. Drop it in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more real-life horror stories. Stay safe out there. Title: 3 disturbing real-life horror accounts. There are skins to reality. Thin membranes that separate the world we think we know from the one that seethes just beneath it. Most of the time, we live our lives without ever touching that veil. But sometimes it tears. Sometimes the monster isn't under the bed. It's wearing a familiar face. Sometimes the horror bleeds into our world from a place with no name. And sometimes the two are so hideously intertwined, you can no longer tell the flesh from the phantom. Today, we peel back the skin on 3 true stories, each one disturbing in its own right. We'll witness a family's love curdle into a fatal act of exorcism. We'll uncover the human parasite who lived like a spider in an attic, a ghost made of flesh and blood before committing a brutal murder. And finally, we will confront the story of a man whose inner demons seemed to physically erupt into the world around him, leaving hardened police officers and prison guards to question their own sanity. These are not campfire tales. They are documented collapses of the ordinary. Our first story begins in a quiet London home, where faith and madness would give birth to an unimaginable horror. Section 1. The Deadly Exorcism of Kennedy Ife. In August 2016, a darkness fell over the Ife family of Enfield, London. Their son, 26-year-old Kennedy Ife, was coming undone. His behavior grew violent, unpredictable. He spoke of a serpent coiled inside his own flesh, a venomous thing he had to be rid of. In his mania, he made threats of grotesque self-harm, including a terrifying desire to sever his own penis. To his family, devout charismatic Christians, this wasn't sickness. This wasn't a mind in collapse. This was a demonic infestation. They believed Kennedy was possessed, and they chose faith over medicine. They wouldn't call a doctor. They would wage a holy war in their own living room. For 3 days, they conducted a desperate, homemade exorcism. They bound Kennedy with whatever they could find: rope, handcuffs, cable ties, trying to chain the demon they were so sure was thrashing inside their son's body. Their home became a battleground. As Kennedy fought against his bonds, his family prayed, their voices rising in a desperate chorus for his soul's deliverance. But as hours bled into agonizing days, Kennedy's body began to fail. Starved of adequate food and water, with the restraints constricting his breath, the life was being crushed out of him. On August 22nd, a call was finally made to 999. His brother reported that Kennedy was dehydrated and struggling to breathe. By the time paramedics forced their way in, it was too late. They found Kennedy lifeless. His body was a testament to the struggle, scarred with over 60 injuries, including what appeared to be a human bite mark. As a final, haunting testament to their unshakable belief, police reportedly found one of Kennedy's brothers still trying to resurrect him with chants and prayers. The trial that followed laid bare the anatomy of a tragedy. The family was charged with manslaughter and false imprisonment, with the prosecution arguing they had allowed misguided religious beliefs to eclipse the screamingly obvious fact that Kennedy needed a doctor, not a demonologist. Yet, in the end, they were cleared of all charges. The law couldn't untangle the knot of sincere, loving intentions from their fatal consequences. The case of Kennedy Ife is a chilling map of that borderland between faith and delusion, a place where the attempt to save a soul can utterly destroy a body. Section 2. The Spider-Man of Denver. In the fall of 1941, in Denver, Colorado, a ghost began to haunt the home of Philip Panover. Only this ghost was alive. Peters, a 73-year-old widower, was living alone while his wife, Helen, was in the hospital recovering from a broken hip. Neighbors kept a watchful eye on the old man, but on October 17th, he failed to show up for a planned dinner. The police were called, and they found a scene of shocking violence. Philip Panover was dead, bludgeoned inside his home. The unsettling part? Every door and window was locked from the inside. There was no sign of a break-in, no weapon, and no suspect. The murder was a perfect sealed room mystery, and a phantom killer seemed to be walking the streets of Denver. When Helen Panover returned home after her husband's funeral, the house felt wrong. She and her new housekeeper heard phantom footsteps and smelled strange odors. The housekeeper, convinced Philip's spirit was restless, fled in terror. Helen soon followed, abandoning the house on Moncrief Place to its ghosts and its secrets. The house sat empty for nearly a year, a monument to an unsolved killing. Police checks turned up nothing. Then, on July 23, 1942, an officer on a routine check heard something impossible, the distinct click of a lock from the second floor of the vacant home. He raced upstairs just in time to see a pair of filthy legs vanish through a tiny trapdoor in a closet. They had found their ghost. The creature they pulled down was a man named Theodore Cornwall, a 59-year-old drifter. Gaunt and foul, he confessed to a story more bizarre than any haunting. Months earlier, he'd broken into the Peters home and discovered a tiny crawl space in the attic. He decided to stay. For 5 weeks, he had lived there, a human parasite, completely undetected. He was a shadow in their home, stealing food while Philip was out. On the night of the murder, he misjudged. He thought Philip had left, but the old man was only napping. Discovered in the kitchen, Cornwall panicked. He grabbed a heavy iron stove shaker and beat Peters to death, then retreated back into his dark, cramped nest. For 9 more months, he remained hidden in the attic, a secret observer listening to the police and the world puzzle over the murder he committed. An officer who examined the crawlspace said, "A man would have to be a spider to stand it long up there." The name stuck. The press crowned him the Denver Spider-Man. Theodore Cornwall was sentenced to life in prison, dying there in 1967. The haunting on Moncrief Place wasn't supernatural. The truth was infinitely more disturbing. A monster had made a web in another man's home, hiding in plain sight. These stories show just how thin the skin of our world is. Sometimes the horror is all too human, and sometimes its origins are far more mysterious. If you find this exploration of the dark and the strange compelling, hit the like button. It tells me you want more journeys into the places where the map reads, "Here be monsters." Now, for our final story, we go to a place where the walls themselves began to weep, and a man's inner torment became a physical storm. Section 3. The Rain Man of Monroe County. In February 1983, a 21-year-old inmate named Don Denmer was given a temporary furlough from the Monroe County Jail in Pennsylvania. He was off to his grandfather's funeral, an event that would uncork a well of trauma and allegedly something far stranger. Don despised his grandfather, the man who had physically abused him for years, and the funeral filled him with a cold rage. Afterward, he went to the home of his friends, the Kiefers. While in their bathroom, a sudden chill seized him. He claimed to see a vision of a crowned man, then collapsed, later finding deep, inexplicable scratches on his arm. Later that evening, As they all sat in the living room, the room grew cold, and water began to bead on the walls and drip from the ceiling. This was no simple leak. The landlord was called and confirmed there were no water pipes in that part of the house. Witnesses, including the landlord, watched as water seemed to defy gravity, moving horizontally across surfaces and even appearing to drip upwards from the floorboards. As this impossible rain intensified, Doan Denver seemed to fall into a trance. The terrified Kiefers called the police. An officer named John Bryan arrived and witnessed the same phenomenon. He later reported feeling a profound chill, stating he'd never seen anything that could explain what was happening. The events followed Doan. When the group went to a pizzeria across the street, the rain started again, inside the restaurant. The owner, convinced Doan was possessed, pressed a crucifix to his skin. According to multiple witnesses, it burned him instantly, leaving a red mark. When Don's furlough ended, the phenomenon followed him back to jail. Water began to pour from the concrete ceiling and walls of his cell. One skeptical guard challenged Doan to make it rain in the warden's office. Minutes later, the warden, sitting alone in his office, found his shirt suddenly and inexplicably soaked. Now convinced, the warden summoned a reverend to perform an exorcism. Witnesses claimed that as the reverend prayed, a foul smell filled the room and the indoor rain fell one last time before finally stopping for good. Skeptics maintain the entire affair was an elaborate hoax, but that would require the collusion of multiple, unrelated witnesses, including police and prison officials. Others suggest the events, while not a hoax, were a form of psychokinetic manifestation, a poltergeist born not from a ghost, but from the storm of trauma in Decker's own mind. The story of Doan Decker remains a deeply unsettling account, not because it's a proven case of the paranormal, but because of the terrifying questions it leaves behind. Was it a haunting? A hoax? Or did one man's inner suffering become so great that it literally began to drown the world around him? Conclusion. A family's love weaponized by faith. A man who became a ghost in his own city. A human storm of grief and rage made manifest. 3 stories that remind us that the boundaries we erect between the real and the unreal are fragile things. They force us to ask where the monster truly lies. Is it in the demon a family sees in their son? Is it in the man hiding in the walls? Or is it in the darkness that can sometimes erupt from the human heart itself? The most terrifying answer is that sometimes there is no line, there is no separation. It's all just a part of the same terrible and wondrous tapestry. 7 terrifying retail worker encounters. Story 1. It was a Tuesday, just 2 hours into my shift. The store was quiet, and I was just trying to get through the day. I never thought I'd have to make a choice between a stolen television and my own life. It started how it always does. A group of people walk in, 4 of them. They split up immediately, which is the first red flag. But in a big box store, it's not unusual. I was in electronics, tidying up the video game aisle, when I saw 2 of them by the high-end TVs. They weren't looking at prices. They were looking at me, at the cameras, at the exits. This is the new reality. Organized retail crime isn't just a line item on a corporate report anymore. It's a force that's becoming more aggressive and sophisticated. These weren't kids grabbing a candy bar. These were professionals. One of them, a woman in a large coat despite the warm weather, came up to me and started asking a string of nonsensical questions about smartwatches. A classic distraction. As I tried to explain the difference between 2 models, I heard the telltale snap of a security wire being cut. My head shot up. Her 2 accomplices had a 65-inch TV off the display and were moving fast towards the fire exit. The 4th member of their crew was already there, holding the door open. My training kicked in. Asterisk, observe, and report. Don't engage. Asterisk, but my manager, a stickler for the rules who was still new, came running from the back office. Hey, you can't do that. He yelled, sprinting toward them. That's when it went from a simple theft to something else entirely. One of the men carrying the TV dropped his side, letting it crash to the floor. He turned, and from his waistband, he pulled out a can of bear mace. He didn't hesitate. He sprayed it directly at my manager, who went down screaming, clutching his face. The other two didn't even flinch. They grabbed a smaller, but still expensive soundbar from a display, and all three were out the emergency exit before we could even process what happened. The woman who'd been distracting me was just gone, vanished. It was a coordinated, violent exit. We called the police, but they were long gone. My manager was okay, eventually, but the encounter left a permanent scar on all of us. Shoplifting isn't just theft anymore. For many of us on the floor, it feels like a contact sport we never signed up for. Confronting a thief is now a primary trigger for violence in retail. Our next story comes from a viewer who worked the late shift at a 24-hour pharmacy. The quiet hours between 2 and 5 am are usually for stockers and the occasional insomniac buying milk. But for her, it became the stage for a different kind of horror. He came in every night, same time, 3:15 a.m., never bought anything. He would just walk the aisles. At first, she thought nothing of it, but then she noticed the pattern. He'd always end up in the aisle she was working in. Not near her, but at the other end, just watching. He was a tall man, gaunt, with eyes that seemed too big for his face. He never spoke. He'd just stand there, sometimes for 20 minutes, his head slightly tilted. She tried moving to another aisle. He'd follow. She went to the break room. When she came back out, he'd be waiting, standing by the registers, pretending to look at magazines. The store was huge and mostly empty, which only amplified the feeling of being watched. The psychological toll was immense. This kind of silent intimidation is a widespread issue, with 54% of retail workers having observed aggressive or harassing customer behaviors. It was impossible to report. What could she say? A man is looking at me? She mentioned it to her manager, who told her that as long as he wasn't stealing or being aggressive, there was nothing they could do. She felt completely powerless. One night, she was in the cosmetics aisle when she dropped her price gun. As she bent down to pick it up, she saw his shoes under the bottom shelf in the aisle behind her. He had been standing there the whole time, perfectly still, perfectly silent, just on the other side of the display. She didn't even scream. A cold dread just washed over her. She stood up, walked directly to the manager's office, and told him she was quitting. She grabbed her purse and walked out, not even waiting for him to respond. As she pushed through the glass doors, she glanced back. He was standing at the front of the store, watching her leave, not even trying to hide it anymore. This story comes from a young woman who worked in a clothing store. It's a chilling reminder that violence doesn't always start with a physical act. So often, it begins with verbal abuse, something 77% of retail workers in a recent UK survey said they had experienced in the past year. She was working the register on a busy Saturday. The line was long, and people were getting impatient. A woman came to the counter to return a dress. It was stained and clearly worn, with no tags. Company policy was firm. No tags, no return. The employee explained this as politely as she could. The customer's demeanor changed in an instant. "What do you mean you can't return it?" "I just bought it." The employee calmly pointed out the visible stain and the missing tags. The woman's voice got louder. "Are you calling me a liar? You think I'm some kind of scammer?" The abuse escalated quickly. The woman called her incompetent, a loser, a string of other names that made the other customers in line shift uncomfortably. The employee held her ground, repeating the store policy, her voice shaking just a little. That's when the threats began. "I know people," the woman hissed, leaning over the counter. "I know where you work." It would be a shame if something happened to you on your way home. This is a reality for so many workers. One survey showed about 53% have been threatened by a customer in the past year. The employee felt a surge of pure fear. This wasn't about a dress anymore. The woman finally stormed out, but not before slamming her hand on the counter and promising, "You'll regret this." For a week, security had to walk the employee to her car. The woman never came back, but the fear lingered. It's the kind of unresolved ending that haunts you, a reminder of how quickly a normal interaction can turn into a terrifying threat. Closing time is often the most dangerous part of the day for a retail worker. This story from a former hardware store employee shows exactly why. It was 10 minutes past closing. The last announcements had been made, the doors were locked, and he was doing a final sweep of the massive store. That's when he found him. A man in the back corner of the lumber aisle, just standing there with an empty cart. "Sir, we're closed," the employee said politely. The man just stared at him. "I need to get a few things." The employee explained again that the registers were closed and he needed to leave. The man's grip on the cart tightened. "I'm not leaving until I get what I came for." A sense of dread started to creep in. The store was empty except for him, his manager, and one other coworker, all waiting up front. He radioed his manager, who told him to escort the man to the front. But the man wouldn't budge. Instead, he started slowly pushing the cart toward the employee, backing him into a row of shelving. These kinds of late-night aggressions are frighteningly common, especially with post-pandemic staffing shortages that often leave workers alone and vulnerable. The employee, a young man just trying to get through college, was terrified. The man was much larger than him and clearly agitated. Finally, the manager came jogging down the aisle. "What's the problem here?" he asked. The customer turned his attention to the manager and started shouting about poor service. It was the distraction the employee needed. He slipped past the cart and hurried to the front of the store. The manager eventually calmed the man down and got him to leave, but it took another 20 minutes. For that entire time, the employee sat in the break room, his heart pounding. The feeling of being trapped, cornered in an empty store, is a fear he says he'll never forget. Recent data shows that 31% of women working in retail report feeling unsafe on the job, and this story is a harrowing example of why. It comes from a woman who worked in a bookstore. A man started coming in regularly, always during her shift. He'd ask her for recommendations, which seemed normal at first. But his questions became more and more personal. He asked if she had a boyfriend, where she lived. He'd compliment her appearance in ways that made her skin crawl. He would follow her around the store, staying just a few feet away, even when she was trying to help other customers. She did her best to ignore him, giving short, polite answers and trying to stay in the more crowded sections of the store. But his behavior escalated. One afternoon, while she was shelving books on a low shelf, he came right up behind her, invading her personal space. "You smell nice," he whispered, his voice right by her ear. She shot up, startled and disgusted. She told him, firmly, to leave her alone. He just smiled, a cold, empty smile, and said, "I'm just being friendly." Sexual harassment is a pervasive issue, with about 1 in 5 female retail workers experiencing or witnessing it. She reported him to her manager, who agreed to keep an eye out. But the man was smart. He never did anything overtly aggressive when the manager was around. He would just watch her from a distance, making sure she saw him. The psychological strain was unbearable. She started having panic attacks before her shifts. After a month of this relentless, low-grade terror, she transferred to a different location, just to escape him. The lack of resolution, the fact that he faced no consequences, is what makes this story so deeply unsettling. Not all encounters end without a climax. Sometimes, the violence that is so often threatened becomes a reality. This account is from a loss prevention officer at a large department store. He'd been watching a man for about 30 minutes. The man was stuffing high-end jackets into a duffel bag with a brazen disregard for the cameras or staff. Confronting shoplifters is incredibly dangerous and a leading cause of violence against retail staff. The officer followed the man as he made his way toward the exit, bypassing all the registers. As trained, the officer approached him once he was past the final point of sale. "Sir, I need you to come back inside with me." The man didn't say a word. He just dropped the bag and swung. A fist connected with the officer's jaw, sending him stumbling back. The man then tried to run, but the officer, despite the ringing in his ears, managed to grab his arm. What followed was a full-on brawl in the store's vestibule. The man was swinging wildly, kicking and spitting, fueled by a desperation the officer had seen many times before. Eventually, with the help of another security guard, they were able to restrain him. The police arrived and took him away. The officer was left with a split lip, a bruised cheekbone, and the jarring memory of the man's rage. This is the reality for the 11% of retail workers who are physically assaulted on the job each year, a number that is tragically on the rise. The stolen goods were recovered, but the sense of safety was shattered. Story 7. This final story is perhaps the most terrifying, because it hangs on a single, unanswered question. It comes from a young man working at a convenience store, one of the most frequent sites of workplace violence. It was late, close to midnight. A man came in, agitated and sweating. He wanted to buy a pack of cigarettes, but was a few dollars short. The employee, following policy, told him he couldn't sell them. The man started pleading, then demanding. The employee held firm. The man reached into his pocket. For a split second, the employee was certain he was pulling out a weapon. His life flashed before his eyes. He braced himself. But instead of a gun or a knife, the man pulled out a pair of scissors. The kind you'd find in a kid's pencil case. He opened and closed them a few times, the snick-snick sound cutting through the tense silence. He looked the employee dead in the eye and said, "It's so easy to just cut through things." He then dropped the scissors on the counter, turned, and walked out of the store without another word. Was it a threat? Was he just a disturbed individual? The employee never found out. He stood there for a long time, staring at the brightly colored scissors, his heart pounding in his chest. That ambiguity, the not knowing, is its own form of psychological terror. He never saw the man again, but the image of those scissors, and the chilling words that came with them, are burned into his memory. The stories you've heard tonight are not isolated incidents. They are part of a rising tide of violence and aggression that retail workers face every single day. From organized crime to individual acts of harassment, the front lines of retail have become an increasingly dangerous place to work. If you have a story of your own that you'd like to share for a future video, please submit it to the email address in the description below. Your stories help shed light on these important issues. If you found this video impactful, please consider liking and subscribing for more content. Stay safe out there. Title: The security guard who saw something that made him quit on the spot. A man tries to tell his story, recounting a violent attack he just survived. He's talking to a news reporter, looking for help, for safety. But as the camera rolls, he's confronted not by his attackers, but by his own boss. The conversation that follows is so shocking, so full of betrayal, that he does the only thing he can. He quits. Live on the air. What could push a man to his breaking point like that? This is the story of Percy Payne, and it's about more than a crime. It's about what happens when the people meant to support you become part of the threat. Section 1. A routine night. The night of June 24th, 2024, started out like any other for Percy Payne. He was on duty for his security guard shift at an office building in East Austin, Texas. As the city outside quieted down, Payne knew this was when things could get dangerous. For any guard working the night shift, the quiet hours bring a different kind of tension. You're often alone, and that's when crime can happen. Payne was simply doing his job, watching over the property. But on this Monday night, around 9:30 p.m., his routine was about to be shattered by a single detail. A garage door left slightly ajar. That small oversight was about to open the door to a nightmare. Section 2. The Moment of Intrusion. From his post, Percy Payne's eyes were glued to the surveillance monitors, his window into the building's quiet, concrete garage. And then he saw them. Two young men on electric scooters slipped right through the partially open door. You can imagine the adrenaline starting to kick in. This is the exact moment every guard prepares for. He watched as the two made a beeline for his personal car, which was parked inside. One stood at the driver's side door, while the other acted as a lookout. There was nothing subtle about it. They were there for his car, and he was the only one there to stop them. Payne didn't think twice. He was a security guard, and this was his watch. He immediately went downstairs to confront them. Section 3. The violent confrontation. When Percy Payne got down to the garage, the quiet erupted into chaos. Startled, the two men tried to flee, and Payne pursued them, trying to hold them until the police could be called. But they weren't going down easy. The situation escalated fast. One of the men used his scooter as a weapon, trying to run Payne over multiple times. Then, Payne saw the glint of metal a screwdriver in one of the attacker's pockets. A chilling command was yelled: "Hold him." Suddenly, Payne was fighting for his life against two people. One lunged, trying to stab him with the screwdriver. It was a desperate brawl, all captured on the building's security cameras. He managed to break free and grabbed his work phone to call 911. But his first call for help went nowhere. Payne says the dispatcher told him that since his car hadn't actually been stolen, they wouldn't send anyone. Stunned, he hung up and called again a few minutes later. This time, a different operator apologized and sent an officer, but help wouldn't arrive for nearly an hour. For that hour, Percy Payne was on his own, having just survived a violent assault for doing his job. The Austin Police Department later said the calls were handled within policy, but for Payne, the feeling of being left unprotected was overwhelming. Section 4. The unthinkable betrayal. 2 days later, Percy Payne was outside his workplace, telling his story to a reporter from Fox 7 Austin. He was in his uniform, hoping to bring attention to the dangers he faced. But in that moment of vulnerability, a second, more shocking assault happened, not a physical one, but a betrayal that cut just as deep. As the interview was happening, Payne's supervisor from Crebe Security Services walked up and cut in. "We have a policy that you're not supposed to do any interviews in your uniform," the supervisor said. Payne, still shaken from the attack, tried to explain he was speaking out for his own safety. The conversation, caught on camera, got tense. Frustrated and feeling completely abandoned, Payne made a split-second decision. He quit, but it didn't end there. After he changed into his own clothes to finish the interview, the supervisor's victim-blaming became sickeningly clear. Payne asked her if she thought the attack was his fault. Her off-camera response was brutal. "I wouldn't have touched him. You touched him." She then added, "I would say yes. Every bit of it is your fault." For Payne, that was it. The fact that my supervisor basically told me it was my fault that I got assaulted. That let me know all that I needed to know, he said later. He'd been attacked by criminals, only to be betrayed by his own employer, who told him on camera that the violence he'd just survived was his own fault. Section 5. The broader context. A dangerous profession. Percy Payne's experience, while shocking, shines a light on a much larger issue. The life of a security guard is filled with risk. The rate of fatal injuries for security guards is significantly higher than for the average American worker. And the leading cause isn't accidents, it's violence and assaults, the very thing Payne survived. The most dangerous hours are deep in the night shift, often between 8 p.m. and 4 a.m. Working these hours usually means working alone, with little support or immediate backup. This isolation isn't just a physical risk. It takes a huge psychological toll. The constant state of high alert, the real threat of violence, and the potential lack of support from management can lead to chronic stress, anxiety, and even PTSD. And when an incident does happen, the response from a boss can either be a lifeline or a source of new trauma. As we saw with Payne, victim blaming from an employer adds a deep sense of betrayal to the physical and emotional wounds. Section 6. Aftermath and a Glimmer of Hope. The story of Percy Payne quitting on live TV after being blamed for his own assault spread far beyond Austin. The footage sparked public outrage, but it also created a powerful wave of support. A local business owner, Michael Cargill of Central Texas Gun Works, saw the news report and knew he had to do something. He reached out to Payne and offered him a new job on the spot. Exactly 1 week after the attack, Percy Payne started his new role. He wasn't in a vulnerable position anymore, but in an environment he described as having positive energy. His new boss didn't just give him a paycheck. He offered him a future with plans to help him get certified as a Level 3 armed security officer. Payne, who has a 14-year-old son, saw it as a lesson in knowing your own value. If you know you're good at it, and you know what you can do, prove them wrong and use that as momentum, he said. While his former employer, Kreb Security, issued a statement that they were investigating, Payne's story had already become a powerful symbol of resilience. Percy Payne's story forces us to ask some tough questions about how we treat our frontline workers. Have you ever felt unsupported or unsafe at your job? What do you believe employers owe their employees when it comes to safety and support? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. These conversations are more important than ever. And if you believe in shining a light on stories like this one, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Conclusion. The story of the guard who quit on the spot is so much more than a viral moment. It's a raw look at what happens when workplace danger meets corporate indifference. Percy Payne went to work to protect the building, but ended up having to protect himself first from attackers, and then from the stunning betrayal of his own boss. His experience is a tough reminder of the risks security guards and other frontline workers face every single day. It points to a systemic failure where companies often prioritize their own liability over loyalty to their people. But in the end, Percy Payne's story is also one of hope. It shows that public support can lead to real change, and that standing up for your own dignity is a powerful act of defiance. His ordeal makes all of us ask a critical question. Who is protecting the protectors? 3 terrifying true Reddit stories of being watched at night. There's a sacred covenant we make with our homes, an unspoken promise of sanctuary. But what happens when that promise is broken? Not by a fist through a door, but by a gaze through the glass. What happens when the one place you should be safe is profaned by a pair of unseen eyes? The comfort of 4 walls becomes a prison the moment you realize the barrier of glass is also a stage. Tonight, we'll peel back the curtain on stories from people who felt that violation, who looked out into the darkness and found the darkness looking back, wearing a human face. Story 1. The Man in the Reflection. The first tale comes from a soul embarking on the liberation of their first solo apartment. It was a ground floor flat, nestled in a quiet corner of the city. For weeks, that freedom was a heady wine. They'd revel in it late into the night, television flickering, positioned directly opposite a large living room window. It began as a whisper in the periphery, a tremor of motion just outside the glass, a phantom against the manicured shrubs. They would kill the movie's sound, lean into the gloom and find nothing. A trick of the light, a stray animal. Rationalizations we offer ourselves before the real dread sets in. But the feeling returned, a prickling on the skin, that ancient animal instinct screaming, "You are not alone." The true terror, the kind that reshapes your world, arrived on a Tuesday. They were watching a film, and the screen, for a single pregnant moment, went black. In that polished abyss, their living room was thrown back at them in perfect detail. The couch, the lamp, their own form, and grafted onto the reflection, standing just outside the window, was the silhouette of a man, motionless, a statue carved from shadow. A glacial cold flooded their veins. They didn't move. They didn't breathe. The movie roared back to life, shattering the image, but it was too late. The ghost was already burned onto their mind. With painstaking slowness, they reached for their phone, desperate to call for help, but silenced by the absurdity of it. I saw a reflection. Who would believe them? Feigning a calm that felt like a betrayal of their own screaming nerves, they rose and walked to the kitchen. From the imagined safety of the doorway, they risked a glance. Through a slight gap in the blinds, the night stared back, and in it, a pale face, pressed against the glass, its features a smudge in the dark. Its eyes were fixed on the empty space on the couch, a space still warm with their presence. A strangled gasp escaped their throat, and the face dissolved into the night. They fumbled with locks, with latches, with anything that might reaffirm the boundary between inside and out. The police came, scanned the property with bored flashlight beams, and found nothing. No footprints, no proof. They were polite, dismissive. It was just a passerby. It was their imagination. But the user knew. They bought blackout curtains the next day, rearranged their entire life around that window. The architecture of their safety had been demolished, and in its place, a constant, chilling awareness. For weeks, he had been watching. Every mundane act, every private moment, had been a performance for the man in the reflection. Friggin' weirdo. Sometimes the most profound chill comes not from the unknown monster, but from the familiar face that has become monstrous in its attention. The terror isn't in the mystery, but in the knowing, and knowing there's nowhere to hide. Story 2. The Neighbor's Schedule. This story comes from a woman whose apartment was a stage. Her bedroom window faced another, just a courtyard away, no distance at all in the intimate geography of a city. For months, it was just a window. Then she began to perceive the ritual. Every night, as she prepared for bed, a light would switch on in the apartment opposite, and a man would be there, sometimes sitting, sometimes standing. She paid it no mind at first. We are creatures of habit. But she soon realized his habit was her. His gaze wasn't just in her direction. It was on her, a focused, unwavering beam. She began to test the theory. A scientist in her own horror story, she'd vary her routine, move about the room. Each time, his head would turn, his attention a physical thing that followed her. The feeling was a deep, violating unease. She started drawing the blinds the moment she came home, but it felt like a surrender, ceding territory in her own sanctuary. The dread crystallized one afternoon. She was leaving her building as he was leaving his. He was older, with a soft, grandfatherly face that made the reality of his obsession all the more obscene. He smiled. "You changed the color of your bedsheets," he said, his voice horribly casual. "The blue was nice, but the green is very calming." She was rendered speechless, a spike of ice in her gut. She'd changed them that very morning, with the blinds, she thought, fully closed. Had there been a gap? Was he watching so intently that he could perceive the slightest flaw in her defenses? She muttered something and fled, her own heartbeat a drum of panic in her ears. She told the building manager, who offered useless sympathy. She told the police, who offered legal boilerplate. How do you legislate against a look? Unless he threatened her, unless he crossed that physical threshold, his watching was not a crime. She was utterly, terrifyingly powerless. The nights were the worst. Lying in the absolute blackness of her room, she could feel him over there, in his own darkness, watching her window, waiting. She was no longer the protagonist of her own life, but a silent actress in the squalid theater of his obsession. She began searching for a new apartment, not because he was a threat to her body, but because he had already consumed her soul. We can, perhaps, understand the hungry obsessions of a man, but what of the watcher that defies understanding? The shape that has no place in our world, yet perches just outside it, gazing in with eyes that are not eyes at all? Story 3. The Thing in the Tree. Our final story comes from a house that bled into a forest, where the family lived by a strange piece of familial catechism, a commandment passed from parent to child. Don't look out the window at night. As a child, he'd obeyed without question. As a teenager, it became a source of ridicule. Home from college, the old rule felt absurd. What could possibly be out there? His curiosity, now a restless beast, was stoked by a sound from outside, the dry scratch of a branch against the house. His resolve hardened. He had to know. He moved to the window, his heart a traitorous drum against his ribs. He peeled back the curtain. At first, only the absolute, ink-black nothing of the woods. Then his eyes adjusted, and he saw it, perched on the limb of an ancient oak, a blasphemy of anatomy. It wore the vague shape of a man, but it was a hideous parody. Its skin was a leprous, faintly glowing light. Its limbs were too long, bent at angles that bone should not allow. Its face was a sunken ruin, with hollow, empty sockets where eyes should be, and its mouth was a lipless wound pulled back into a silent, eternal grin. He was paralyzed, a statue of pure terror. He couldn't scream. He could only stare at this impossible thing. As he watched, one of its spidery arms lifted and scraped its claws against the tree, creating the very sound that had drawn him to the window. Then, its head swiveled slowly, and though it had no eyes, he felt its gaze land upon him, a feeling of being seen, known, and hated. That's when his voice returned, a raw, ragged scream as he stumbled away. His parents burst in, his father clutching a shotgun. His father didn't even look at him. He went straight to the window, stared out, and unleashed a torrent of curses. When the son dared to look again, the branch was empty. The police came, swept the woods with their lights, and found nothing. Not a footprint, not a track, not a shred of proof that the thing was ever there. They left, muttering about dreams and animals. But his father, his voice trembling with a rage born of pure fear, knew better. "Damn it, son," he said. It was a simple task. Just don't look out the window. He never learned what the creature was. It was a forbidden knowledge, a family secret kept behind lock and key. But he understood the rule now. Some things belong to the night, and the only courtesy they ask is that we do not acknowledge them. The window is a border, and to look through it is to issue an invitation. Conclusion: a window is a mirror and a portal. It shows us our world, but it also shows our world to whatever waits outside. The sanctity of home is a myth we tell ourselves, a fragile membrane of glass and wood that can be pierced by a single determined gaze. The comments are open, a space for your own confessions of the things you've seen in the dark. For more explorations into the beautiful and the grotesque, subscribe to our channel. Sleep well, and try not to dream of the face at the glass. Title: What Nurses Find in Empty Hospital Rooms But Never Report. What really happens in a hospital room after a patient is gone? We like to think of them as sterile, empty spaces, wiped clean of the life that just left. But for the nurses walking the halls in the dead of night, they know that some things get left behind. Hospitals are supposed to be places of science and logic, where every action is documented and every symptom has a diagnosis. But they're also places of intense human experience, where the line between one world and the next can feel paper thin. This is the story of one of those nurses, a veteran of the night shift, and what she found in a freshly cleaned room that she could never ever report. For nurses, the night shift is a world all its own. The frantic energy of the day melts away, leaving just the low, steady hum of machinery and the sound of quiet, measured breaths. The silence here is different. It's heavy. It's in these hours, somewhere between 3 and 4, and what some call the witching hour, that the hospital feels most like itself, like a place holding its breath. It's the kind of environment that makes you hyper-aware, where exhaustion can play tricks on your mind. But sometimes it isn't a trick. Sometimes the hospital decides to show you something. Her name was Sarah. With 15 years on the job, she was a true creature of the night shift. She moved with a quiet efficiency that only comes from years of navigating 4 poles and monitors in the dark. Sarah was practical, grounded. She believed in evidence, in protocols, in the things she could see and touch. The strange stories other nurses sometimes whispered at the station about phantom call lights or shadows that moved, she always chalked them up to stress and a serious lack of sleep. Tonight felt like any other Tuesday. The 3rd floor medical surgical unit was quiet, with only the steady rhythm of beeps and whirs for a soundtrack. As she was doing her rounds, her sneakers squeaking on the polished floor, she passed room 313. She felt a slight, familiar change in the air right outside the door. This room had a reputation. Nothing you could ever prove, but the nurses who'd been there long enough knew it. They called it a heavy room, a place where the air just felt thick and watchful. It was a feeling most of them chose to ignore, a bit of hospital folklore you'd never acknowledge officially. For a professional like Sarah, it was an absurd feeling to even have, yet it was there. The last person in room 313 was an elderly gentleman named Arthur Harrison. He'd been in for pneumonia, a quiet man whose family didn't visit much. He was frail, but always had a weak, genuine smile for Sarah when she checked his vitals. He passed away peacefully right after dinner, a gentle end to a long life. Sarah had done the post-mortem care herself, a final act of dignity she gave all her patients. Afterward, housekeeping came in, their efficiency a stark contrast to the slow, quiet moments before. They stripped the bed, sanitized every single surface, and restocked the supplies. The room was now officially empty, a blank slate. For Sarah, this was just the routine, the necessary cycle of closing one chapter to start the next. The room was clean, sterile, and empty. It was just a room. It was 3:15 a.m. walking back to the nurse's station. Sarah heard something that made her stop. A faint sound coming from room 313. It was, without a doubt, the sound of a running faucet. She tilted her head, listening. That was impossible. She'd checked the room herself after the cleaners left. The bathroom door was locked from the outside standard procedure for empty rooms. Her mind started racing, trying to find a logical reason. A broken pipe, a weird malfunction. She pulled out her master key, the cold metal familiar in her hand. But the second she slid the key into the lock, the sound of the water cut out. Not like a tap being turned off, but instantly, as if a switch had been flipped. A shiver went down her spine, a feeling she tried to ignore. Just fatigue, she told herself. Classic night shift brain. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was cold, a deep chill that had nothing to do with the hospital's AC. That heavy, watchful feeling was back, but stronger this time. It felt like the air itself had made way for something she couldn't see. She went straight to the bathroom and flicked on the light. The sink was bone dry. The shower was untouched. The toilet was still. No leak, no drip, no rational explanation for what she'd heard. She took a deep breath, annoyed with herself for letting the room's spooky reputation get to her. It's just a room, she thought. She turned to leave, ready to write the whole thing off. But then her eyes landed on the bed. The sheets were crisp and white, the pillow perfectly fluffed. But sitting right in the middle of that pillow was something that couldn't possibly be there. A small silver locket, tarnished with age, gleaming in the dim emergency light. Her professional, steady heart started hammering against her ribs. This wasn't just weird. It was a massive breach of protocol. A patient's personal items are carefully bagged, labeled, and sent with the family or to a secure lockup. A sterilized room is, by definition, empty. An object like this, so personal, should not have been left behind. It defied every rule. Her training, 15 years of it, screamed at her to put on gloves, bag the locket, and file an incident report. But some other, deeper instinct kept her frozen to the spot. This felt wrong. Hesitantly, her hand shaking just slightly, she reached out and picked it up. It was ice cold. Her fingers fumbled with the tiny clasp until, with a soft click, it opened. Inside were two tiny, faded, black and white photos behind yellowed plastic. On one side was a young woman with dark, wavy hair, a face Sarah had never seen. She looked at the other side, and her breath caught in her throat. The other photo was of her. It was Sarah, no question, in her blue scrubs, leaning against the nurse's station with a tired but real smile. It was a recent picture, taken within the last few months. An impossible picture. Mr. Harrison, the quiet old man, didn't have a camera or a smartphone. He had no visitors who could have snuck a photo, and there was no way anyone could have taken that picture, developed a miniature version, and placed it inside a vintage locket in a room that had been sealed and sterilized. In that one silent moment, the sterile scientific world Sarah had built her entire life on just crumbled. A wave of dread, far colder than the room, washed over her. This wasn't a weird noise or a trick of the light. This was a physical object in her hand that defied all logic. Her mind spun, desperately searching for an explanation, but there wasn't one. She just stood there, in the heavy silence of room 313, holding something that shouldn't exist. What would she even write in a report? Found a locket in a terminally clean room with a picture of me inside? She could just imagine it. They'd suggest a psychological evaluation. They'd say the stress, the night shifts, the closeness to death had finally made her crack. The profession is built on observable facts, and there is no form, no checkbox for terrifying, impossible things. Reporting this would be career suicide. She'd be labeled as unstable, unreliable. In that moment, she finally understood why so many nurses kept these stories to themselves. They become secrets you carry alone, maybe whispered to a trusted coworker, but that's it. To talk about it openly is to risk being ridiculed by a field that demands logic. She looked down at the locket in her palm. It was her secret now. With a decisive click, she snapped it shut, the sound echoing in the silent room. She slid the cold metal into her scrub pocket, its weight a constant, terrifying reminder. She walked out of room 313, pulled the door closed, and she never spoke of it again. Sarah's story is one of countless experiences that nurses carry in silence, moments that have no explanation in a world that demands one. If this story sent a chill down your spine, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the quietest corners of the hospital. It turns out a huge number of you who watch aren't subscribed, and clicking that button really helps us keep sharing these accounts. Now we want to hear from you. Are you a healthcare worker with a story you've never been able to share? Let us know in the comments. This is a safe space to tell your story. You're not alone. Conclusion. Hospitals are a paradox. They're centers of science and sterile procedure, but they're also places soaked in the memories of life, loss, and everything in between. For nurses on the night shift, that line between the world we can explain and the one we can't, it's incredibly thin. They are the silent guardians of those final moments, the keepers of secrets that will never make it into a medical chart. Because sometimes, the most powerful goodbyes are the ones that are never said out loud. Next time, we'll explore the unsettling and often ignored premonitions of patients on the brink of death. Title: The creepiest phone call that will haunt you for life. It was 2:37 in the morning on a Tuesday when the call came in, the one that changed everything. On his late-night radio show, Whispers in the Dark, David was used to lonely people calling with strange stories. He was the city's confessor, a velvet voice for the insomniacs, the heartbroken, and the afraid. But this call was different. This one had the metallic taste of real fear. If you're here, it's because you love those strange, unsettling stories that stick around in your head long after you've heard them. The tales we tell are designed to find the little cracks in your reality and seep right in. So you might want to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because you won't want to miss what's coming next. Section 1. The Show and the Caller. For David, Whispers in the Dark wasn't just a job, it was his sanctuary. From a soundproof booth high above the sleeping city, he felt this unique connection to the world below. He was like a lighthouse keeper, guiding ships through their own private storms. Tonight's theme was a sound you can't forget. He'd heard it all. Phantom whispers, weird humming in the desert, the chilling silence after a tragedy. Then, line 3 started blinking. We have a caller on the line, folks. Calls himself Leo. Welcome to Whispers in the Dark, Leo. What's the sound you can't forget? David said, his voice smooth as butter. The only answer was the hiss of an open line and a shaky breath. Leo, you there? Yes, the voice on the other end finally stammered, thin and frayed with panic. I'm here. I'm listening. I always listen. Glad to have you. What's on your mind tonight? A long pause. All David could hear was a sound like rustling fabric, or maybe dry leaves skittering on pavement. There's someone outside my window, Leo whispered. David leaned into the mic. This was the kind of call that made a show. Okay, Leo, stay calm. Are you sure? Could be a tree branch, maybe just the wind? No, Leo insisted, his voice cracking. It's a person. Or it's shaped like a person. It's just standing there, at the edge of my yard, right by the trees. It's so still. A chill crept down David's spine. He shot a look at his producer, Sheila, who immediately looked worried. Leo, have you called the police? They'd think I'm crazy, Leo breathed. It's just the way it's standing. It's not right. It's too tall. Its arms are too long. It's just watching my window. David's job was to be the voice of reason, but he could hear the raw terror in this man's voice. He'd heard hundreds of prank calls. They were clumsy, obvious. This was different. What's it doing, Leo? Is it moving? No, that's the thing. Hasn't moved for 10 minutes, just standing there, in the dark. But I can see it. The moon's so bright tonight. I can see the shape of it. Oh God, what is it, Leo? What do you see? Leo's breath hitched into a sob. I think it sees me. I think it knows I'm watching it. Its head, I think it just tilted its head. Suddenly, the sound on the line changed. The rustling was gone, replaced by a low electrical crackle. Leo? Leo, can you hear me? A new sound came through the static. Faint, wet, and scraping. It's at the window, Leo whimpered. It's at the glass. David's blood ran cold. Leo, get away from the window. Lock your doors. Call 911 right now. The scraping got louder, more frantic. And then, through the phone, David heard a sound that would be burned into his memory forever. A high-pitched, blood-curdling scream of pure terror. It wasn't a scream for help. It was the sound of a final, horrifying realization. The screen cut off. The line went dead. Section 2. The immediate aftermath. The studio was dead silent. David stared at the console, the light for line 3 now dark. Sheila was pale, her hand clamped over her mouth. What the hell was that? She mouthed. David swallowed hard. Get me that number. Call it back. He cut to a commercial break, his hands shaking as he pulled off his headphones. The silence in the room felt heavy, suffocating. Sheila was already dialing, then shook her head. Go straight to a disconnected message. Trace it, David ordered. On it, she said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. A second later, she frowned. That's weird. It's a landline, but the address is a vacant lot. Place was demolished 6 years ago. A prank, it had to be. A very elaborate, very cruel prank. That's what they told themselves. It's what David repeated in his head all the way home, and as he double-checked the locks on his own doors. But he couldn't shake the sound of that scream. And he couldn't forget the picture Leo had painted. A tall, silent figure with arms too long, watching from the dark. Section 3, The Haunting Begins. 3 days went by. The station logged the incident as a disturbing hoax, and everyone tried to move on. David tried too. He hosted his show, took calls about lost loves and lonely nights. But the memory of Leo's call stuck with him, a dark stain he couldn't wash out. Friday night, he was at home, trying to unwind with a glass of whiskey. It was just after midnight when his personal cell phone rang. He glanced at the screen, figuring it was Sheila. He froze. He'd only seen the number once, on Sheila's monitor, but he knew it instantly. It was Leo's number. His heart hammered against his ribs. How was that possible? It was a disconnected line. He thought about just letting it ring. But the same curiosity that made him a good radio host took over. He had to know. With a trembling thumb, he answered. Hello? He whispered. Section 4. The voice in the static at first, there was nothing but that same static he'd heard right before Leo's scream. That low, electric hum. He was about to hang up, chalking it up to a glitch in the system. Then, a voice came out of the noise. It was a whisper. And in a sickening, stomach-lurching moment, David realized who it was. It was his own voice. The whisper spoke the words that had been haunting his sleep for 3 nights. There's someone outside my window. David dropped the phone like it was on fire. It clattered to the floor, but the voice kept coming from the tiny speaker, a perfect, chilling copy of his own. It was reciting Leo's entire terrified monologue, word for word. It's shaped like a person. It's just standing there. It's too tall. He scrambled to pick the phone up and kill the call, his fingers fumbling. The silence that came after was somehow worse. He was breathing hard, his apartment suddenly feeling way too big. He checked his call log. The number was there, Leo's number. He tried to explain it away. Caller ID spoofing? A recording from his own show? But the voice, it hadn't sounded like a broadcast. It was intimate. It was his voice, whispering right into his ear. Section 5. Escalation and paranoia. That was the first call. It wasn't the last. They started coming every night. Sometimes just after midnight. Sometimes closer to 3 Always from Leo's number. Always his own voice, whispering a piece of that final, terrifying call. He stopped answering. It didn't matter. It would ring and ring, then go to voicemail. He'd wake up to a new one. Its arms are too long. I think it sees me. He tried blocking the number. The calls still got through. His cell provider said it was impossible. He started to feel a creeping paranoia take hold. He felt like he was being watched. He'd catch himself staring out his own window, searching the shadows for a tall figure that was never there. Sleep was a memory. When he did drift off, he had nightmares filled with static and whispers. He was losing his grip. Section 6. The climax. A week after it all started, David hit his breaking point. He was sitting in the dark, his phone on the table in front of him like a time bomb. When it rang, he snatched it up. What do you want from me? He yelled into the phone, his voice raw with fear and exhaustion. For the first time, the whispering stopped. The static died. There was just a deep, bottomless silence that stretched on and on. David held his breath, listening to the frantic beat of his own heart. Then, a new sound came from the phone. A voice. It was still his, but it was distorted now, deeper, with a wet, guttural quality. And this time, it didn't speak Leo's words. It whispered a secret, a single short sentence. A secret from David's childhood that he had never, ever told another living person. A secret he had buried so deep he'd almost forgotten it himself. The phone fell from his hand. The horror wasn't about some stranger named Leo anymore. It wasn't about a prank. Whatever this thing was, it was connected to him. It had reached inside of him and pulled out his darkest memory. It knew him. Conclusion: David never went back to the radio station. He couldn't stand the thought of being a voice in the dark, now that he knew what was listening from the other side. He moved out of his apartment, got a new phone, a new number. He tried to disappear, but he knew it was pointless. The story doesn't end with an answer. It ends with a question. It ends with David in a new, empty apartment surrounded by unpacked boxes. He's sitting on the floor in the dark, terrified of what he might see if he looked at the windows. His new phone, silent for weeks, suddenly lights up the room. An incoming call. He squints at the screen, his heart stopping. The caller ID isn't Leo's number. It's his own. The scariest stories are the ones that feel like they could happen to you, the ones that get under your skin and just stay there. If you have a true, inexplainable story of your own, I'd love to hear it. The email for submissions is in the description below. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe to Halfway Dark for more tales from the dark. And that brings us to the end of another terrifying journey into the world of night shift horror. If you made it through all these stories, you're braver than most, or maybe you're just as addicted to these spine-chilling tales as I am. These stories remind us that when the sun goes down and most people are safely tucked in their beds, there are brave souls out there keeping the world running. But sometimes they encounter things that can't be explained. If you have your own night shift horror story, drop it in the comments below. It might just make it into our next compilation. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into darkness, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because here at Halfway Dark, the horror never sleeps. Until next time, stay safe out there in the dark. And remember, you're never really alone on the night shift.